Hey everyone, it's Professor Hammond, and I'm here for round two for our exam that is happening tomorrow. So I'm just going to do just a brief review of some of the things that will be on the exam. I had a couple people ask if this was coming, so I thought I'd put it together for you guys. So first looking at chapter 5, that was our whole strategic planning chapter. So first of all, if we look at strategic planning versus operational, definitely know the difference between the two. Think strategic, more than a year, operational, less than a year. Strategic, top managers, operational, middle to frontline managers, and also knowing, the types of things that happen in operational planning like budgets or policies and procedures. The five forces model, this is Michael Porter's model of the five different competitive forces. Please go back, know these, be able to describe them, and be able to provide an example of each. So that's going to be a big component of the exam. The one confusing part, I think, is the power of buyers and the power of sellers and knowing kind of the difference between the two. If the power of buyers is if you're dependent on maybe a company or group of people that are buying your product versus the power of sellers if you're dependent on someone to provide a part for you and you are kind of at their whim, I guess, if they decide to not sell it to you anymore or have a delay. So take a look back at that. SWOT analysis, knowing what the different components are, thinking about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Strengths and weaknesses are internal, opportunities and threats are external, so knowing the difference. And then we have this whole big chunk of strategies. So my best suggestion would be to make sure you know what they are and then also be able to identify them from some examples. So if I gave you the example of perhaps I said a cracker company decided that they were going to start selling chicken sandwiches. Like that would be maybe diversification, but unrelated diversification. Versus if I was a chicken sandwich organization or company that was selling chicken sandwiches, it might make a lot of sense for also to start selling like chicken and waffles because that's related. So make sure you understand how to identify examples as well. Also, we have grand strategies. These are corporate, so those are umbrella. Business strategies are more line of business, so a little bit more specialized. And then competitive strategies are how are you going to compete? What makes you different? So just as a reminder, differentiation is what's the thing, what's that one thing that makes us distinct or different versus focus, which is I'm focusing on a specific market or a product or something very narrow instead of just being different. So it is a little bit different there. Chapter 6 was all about change and definitely knowing that those forces for change can be both external, which is more the environment, versus internal, which is more management and structure and things like that. The types of change, you'll be given some examples. If I said, oh, we're going to give you all electronic means to collect money from your customers instead of manually, then that's going to be a technology change. Just a reminder, when we think about people change, it's more how that person is changing, and usually that's through training or maybe discipline. It's not structures, organizational structures, and changing how that organization chart looks. That is truly going to be structural change, and often strategy leads to a bunch of other changes in structure and technology and people. Yes, the difference between incremental and radical change, whether it's bit by bit versus boom, it's happening, that's more the radical side. Understanding how managers overcome that resistance to change, and that was when we had that whole list on the whiteboard of here are the things that people say about why they resist change, whether it's loss or fear of loss, or maybe they feel overwhelmed or they like that control. So we had a bunch of different things that are reasons why people resist change. And then the manager can come in and what are some of the things they can do to help people feel comfortable with change. And a lot of communication and support, getting them involved early in the change process, that's a big one. So looking at that list and being comfortable with the differences. We didn't really talk much about organizational development, so that really won't be on there, but be familiar with Kurt Lewin's change model, the unfreeze, freeze, refreeze, and also being able to identify, if this was a short answer, some of the management components or skills or behaviors that go with each step in that process. The unfreezing process, getting people ready for change, the change, and then solidifying the change, kind of like an ice cube unfreezes, and then we need to refreeze it again in a new shape. Okay, so thinking through that. And then the updated change model, really the only thing that it updated mainly was looking at the resistance to change. So take a look at that. Force field analysis, I actually don't think a question made it on there about that. So, but just as a reminder, we have the driving forces, and then we have the obstacle, kind of the things that are preventing that change from happening, and we're trying to identify what those are so we can overcome them. All right, chapter 7. We have all of our principles of organization. So definitely look back at these, and most likely you'll see some examples. So if I said, oh, we're in a car factory, maybe there's different people that assemble different parts of the car. What would that be? Well, that would be division of labor, right? Because they're dividing up the job into little pieces. So, or having one boss for, each person reporting to one boss. Well, that's going to be unity of command, and that doesn't always happen, right? So having one boss for each person, having that clear chain of command, knowing who you report to and who reports to you, if anyone. So definitely look back at these. Reminder about coordination, those are the processes that we use to make sure everyone is on track. And then when we think about centralized versus decentralized authority, it's mainly decision making that gets pushed out from either one person to many people. So remembering what that is. Organizational charts, yes. Knowing what it shows that structure, shows the formal structure of an organization, and that the vertical lines and the horizontal lines, what those show. So like the vertical lines show that chain of command. Those horizontal lines show like relationships between different areas of the organization. I'm not going to ask you to create one, so that's not necessarily on there. You will need to be familiar with different types of departmentalization. That's just how the organization is structured, not how they organize their products. It's how the people are organized. Are they organized by the function that they do, by the customers that they serve, by the location that they are in? So remember what that is. Delegation, yes. Understanding what that there are some good and there are some bad sides to delegation. Well, I don't know if there's any bad sides, but there's some obstacles that we have to overcome when we're delegating things. And we talked through, what makes a task and a person delegation worthy. And just a reminder, and I think I had this wrong on the Kahoot because I think I clicked the wrong thing, that we should delegate things that develop employees, things that are maybe outside the scope of someone's job design, so something new. We shouldn't delegate things that are in crisis or things that are confidential. So looking back at those lists that we discussed. And then I need you to know the delegation process. Be able to articulate it, so make sure you can describe it and apply it to a situation. So take a look at that as well. All right, so our last page is our Keller chapters. You'll see a couple of questions from this list, okay? So take a look back at these questions, and I think there's three questions from these bullet points, okay? I think I've got one from each chapter. So if, for example, it might be a question about, what happens when we find our identity through our work. Well, I gave you some answers here. You can pull them from the book. So taking a look at those. This question about the two purposes of businesses, that definitely will be on there. So take a look back at that. So creating meaningful work and creating goods and services that cause the community to flourish. Those are the two that I'd be looking for there. I did have one question from a student, because you may not totally be on board with this common grace concept. You may or may not. So if for some reason I asked this question about common grace and it's not necessarily something that you totally buy into, that's okay. You can just say, according to Keller's perspective is such and such. So that just so you know that that's something that everyone kind of has to wrestle through different concepts that we come across, right? So that I just wanted to mention that as well. There'll be true false questions, multiple choice, and some short answers. So very similar to the last exam, and you guys are going to do great. So have a excellent time studying, and I will see you in class.